everybody. I'm Evie Roberts, and this is my podcast, Talking in the Dark. Welcome. The aim of this podcast is to raise awareness about blindness, visual impairment, and disability in general, in a happy and light-hearted way. For those of you that don't know, I am blind. I was born with a condition called bilateral anophthalmia. Try spelling that one. It basically means that when I was born, my eyes didn't develop properly, so I wear prosthetics instead. The goal of this podcast is to remove some of the stigma and stereotypes around disabilities, whilst also having fun at the same time. Each week, I will be interviewing people from all walks of life, including some with hidden or physical disabilities like mine, and getting to know a little bit more about them and the lives they lead. In this episode, I am very excited to tell you that I will be talking to comedian Lee Ridley, also known as Lost Voice Guy. My name is Evie Roberts, and this is my podcast, Talking in the Dark. Welcome. Hi Lee, how are you doing?
I'm great, thanks. It's lovely to be here.
Oh, well, it's such an honour to meet you and so lovely to have you on the podcast. How's your day going so far? Have you got anything nice planned for today?
I've just been doing a bit of writing, trying to think up of some more jokes and failing miserably.
Oh, well, I'm sure you're doing better than you think, but hopefully maybe some more will come to you later if you're not having too much luck right now. So to begin with, could you tell me a little bit about your disability?
Of course, I was very ill when I was 6 months old, and I developed cerebral palsy as a result. In my case, it meant that I lost my speech, I walk very funny, and my right side of my body is weaker than my left. You would be surprised at how many people come up to me after my shows and ask if I really can't speak. Because, of course, it would totally be acceptable to pretend to be disabled for a laugh. I can safely say that I have never been able to talk. I have lived in Newcastle all my life, but for some reason I still haven't picked up the accent. However, if you were trying to place my accent, it's from PC World.
Fair enough. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's one of those things. I find when you've got a disability, people sort of ask you some very random questions, don't they? And I'm not really sure why it happens, but I've definitely had that experience before, and like you've just mentioned, you definitely have too. Um, it's a very strange experience. It's like people think they can just sort of ask you questions because you have a disability. But I mean, how does that make you feel when people ask you those sort of slightly strange questions?
I actually don't mind it because it's given me plenty of material for my comedy routine, but it does get quite silly at times.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I mean, yeah, I suppose it would give you some pretty good material. So I suppose if you're looking on the bright side, there definitely is that aspect. So could you tell me a little bit about your childhood and some of the difficulties you encountered?
I think one of the biggest traumas growing up was having to deal with people staring and laughing at me in the street. I always found that really hard to cope with, and I still do today. Now, I have much thicker skin, but when I was younger, I didn't, and it used to happen quite often. I would walk past people in the street, and I could tell that they were judging me. Teenagers were the worst for laughing and taking the mick. In fact, if I knew I was going to pass a big group of teenagers who were likely to make fun of me, I would go the long way round just to avoid them.
Wow, I mean, yeah, I can't imagine how much that would have hurt. I mean, yeah, like obviously you're gonna have much less thick skin when you're a child. And yeah, I mean, I can't imagine how difficult that would have been and how much that would have hurt. And it shouldn't be the case, should it? It shouldn't be that people stare at you and laugh at you just because you're different to them. But unfortunately, it is the case sometimes. And I'm guessing yeah, I can imagine that would have hurt quite a lot. Um, yeah, I mean, that must have been very difficult to go through. Now, obviously, you use a communication device to talk, and I believe that you got your first communication device when you were about 8. How did that feel when you were sort of finally able to voice your feelings?
Yes, it made a big difference to me. Until then, I just used sign language, which was a very limited way of communicating. So
Yeah,
it felt great to be able to express myself properly for the first time. Even if the technology was very limited and very big back in the 80s.
yeah, absolutely. I can imagine that would have been. I mean, yeah, I that must have been so freeing for you, even if, yeah, that obviously the technology's gotten better over time, but finally being able to express how you really felt in another medium to sign language. I mean, I can't imagine how much of an incredible feeling that must have been for you. So I know that before comedy, you worked in journalism. So what made you want to branch out into comedy?
I've always been a big fan of comedy, and I love going to watch stand-up comedy myself. I'd always said that, if I could talk, that would probably be my dream job. I never expected to do it though. I just didn't think it was possible. Then, some friends said that it might work, and that I should try it. I thought they were crazy at first, but the idea stuck in the back of my mind. Eventually, I decided to give it a try, because I knew I'd regret it if I didn't. It seems like I was right. Even after agreeing to do it, I was worried that it wouldn't work. I was scared that people wouldn't be able to understand me, and I'd just be standing there telling jokes to myself. Once my first gig was out of the way, though, I was much more confident about it all.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's been incredibly successful for you. Um, and I mean, thank God you tried it really because it's given you such an amazing career. But yeah, I think it's a very sort of natural reaction, a natural sort of human reaction to have that self-doubt about, whether this is going to work, whether you should try it. And I think it's a very natural thing that I think we all have about different things in our lives. But I'm just wondering, listening to you sort of say that, do you think if your friends hadn't suggested giving it a go, do you think you ever would have done it, or do you think you needed that maybe little bit of encouragement?
I probably wouldn't have done it, no, so I'm very grateful for them for the idea. It worked out for them as well, though, because they eventually put a bet on me to win Britain's Got Talent.
Well, yeah, it did work out very good for them then, didn't it? But yeah, I think that's the thing I talk about with a lot of my guests actually is that support network and having those people around you who will kind of push you in the right direction when you need it and give you that encouragement. And also be there for you when you're at your lowest points as well, but give you that encouragement. And so it's a thing I talk about with a lot of my guests, and I think it's incredibly important. And obviously, that sort of support network of your friends for you was sort of what gave you the career you have now, which is absolutely incredible. So, what would you say you enjoy about performing comedy for people?
It just feels so great to be standing up on the stage and having people laugh at stuff that I have written myself. If we take my first gig as an example, by the time I walked off stage, I didn't want it to end at all. I was on a massive high for the rest of the night. In fact, I didn't get any sleep that night because I was still so excited about what had just happened. In that moment, I knew that I wanted to be a stand up comedian, and I couldn't wait to get up on the stage again.
Oh my gosh, I mean that sounds absolutely incredible. I mean, I'm not surprised you didn't get any sleep that night. I mean, yeah, like yeah, I just think that must be the most incredible feeling. But yeah, like you say, having people react to the material that you've written. I mean, am I right in saying that must feel, like a massive feeling of accomplishment for you.
Yes, I definitely need some validation in my life, so that work's a treat.
Yeah, I think we all need that now and again. And I would imagine that definitely does work a treat. But yeah, I think that's a very human thing. I think we all need that validation once in a while. Now, you often joke about elements of your disability in your routines. In your experience, has humour been a good way of breaking down barriers?
Think joking about my condition helps me cope a lot. I've always seen the funny side of my disability, and I think that's been very important to me. I also think I joke about my disability as a defense mechanism. As long as I'm laughing at myself, it means that no one else can laugh at me first. In that way, I think that comedy is a very powerful tool. And that's why I would like to see more disabled comedians booked by comedy clubs, appearing at festivals and being shown on television. Basically, more disabled people being portrayed in a positive light. I'm sick of being part of a group in society who are mostly demonized in the media. The general public need to see that we're not all just scroungers and benefits cheats. They need to see that disabled people can contribute an awful lot to society, and they need to see that we have a sense of humour just like anyone else. Programs like The Last Leg on Channel 4 have paved the way, but there's still a lot that could be done. Only when we see disabled people on our stages and on our screens as much as anyone else will attitudes really change. And only then will disabled people feel fully a part of society.
I could not agree with you more about that. Yeah, I think it's so important that we start to see more representation of the disabled community in all aspects, but especially in mainstream media, because that's the thing that most people consume most often, and it's just not there's not enough of it. Like you say, we really need to start seeing more of that representation. um and yeah, obviously, like you say, programs like The Last Leg are brilliant, but the more representation we get of that, the better. um and I mean, I think it has gotten. I mean, I'm only 15, so I don't really know what it was like sort of 30, 40 years ago. But I think from what I've learnt from my guests, it has gotten better. But what would you say needs to be done in order to see more representation of the disabled community in sort of mainstream media?
I would say that people just have to give us a chance more and trust that we can do the job just like anyone else, because I don't think that's the case at the moment.
Yeah, no, I don't think it is either. And yeah, it's just about putting that trust in people, because we're all human. Like, you know, just because disabled people may do things a little bit differently to everyone who is able-bodied does not mean that we're not human. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't have the same chances as everyone else. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't be treated equally. And yeah, like you say, it is just about that trust. I mean, just to slightly circle back to sort of breaking down those barriers. I mean, I occasionally find that people can be sort of a little bit awkward around me as someone with a disability. I have as someone with a visual impairment. They can sometimes be a little bit cautious and scared that they'll do or say the wrong thing. I mean, is that something that you often find, that people can be a little bit cautious? And since becoming more well known, do you think that's lessened for you slightly?
Most definitely. I experience things like that all the time, because people just aren't used to having to deal with a disabled bloke. But winning Britain's Got Talent has helped a bit. It's just a shame I had to win a talent show for it to happen, because that isn't an option for everyone.
No, definitely not. And yeah, I totally get what you mean. It shouldn't be the case that you have to, yeah, like you say, win a talent show or do something like that for people to feel, sort of less cautious and more comfortable around you, because not everyone is able to do that. And it should just be the case that disabled people are interacted with by the general public just as normally as someone would interact with an able-bodied person. And in some cases, yes, that is the case, but in some cases it's not. And I think a lot of it is down to, or in my experience, it has been if someone has not been around disabled people before, if if they're not close to or know someone who has a disability, they just don't know how to act around people. And so I think that sort of educating people and getting them used to seeing people with disabilities is really important, so people know just to treat us normally, really, and not to feel awkward in any way. um Now, I've definitely noticed, and I think my listeners will have by now, that your communication device has a Geordie accent, which makes sense because of where you're from. But I know you worked with a company and a voice artist to establish a voice for you with a Geordie accent. So, can you tell me about that process and what being able to personalize a voice meant to you?
I've always wanted a Geordie accent. I don't think my other voice represents where I am from, and it isn't exactly the voice that I would have had if I wasn't disabled. To be honest, there's nothing wrong with my other voice, except from the fact that it sounds very posh. It sounds like I should be reading the shipping forecast on Radio 4. It means a lot to me to finally be able to sound like my family and friends, though. It all started when I put a request out on social media asking people to volunteer to be my new voice. And the competition was very tough indeed. In fact, I was overwhelmed by the response from my fellow Geordies, and it made the job of choosing the right voice very difficult. But in the end, Dan's voice was the one that I kept coming back to and listening to over and over again. I just thought it sounded quite upbeat and friendly, which is an advantage when you're a comedian. But I also thought it sounded similar to my family as well. My family are from Consett in County Durham, so I'd like to sound as close as I can do that. And I think that this voice fits the bill.
Yeah, I mean that totally makes sense. Of course, you'd want to sound like your family and your friends and the people that you're close to, and it's incredible that now you're able to do that. But it's also so lovely that so many people reached out to you and wanted to be a part of that and make that possible for you. I mean, I'm guessing that must have, that must have felt amazing that so many people wanted to make this possible for you. I mean, am I right in saying that? How did you feel with the sort of overwhelming response that you got?
Yes, it was a lovely feeling to have so many people want to help, but it did make the job of choosing an accent very hard indeed.
Yeah, I can imagine it would have it would have made it very, very difficult. You would have had a lot to choose from. But yeah, I mean, you said earlier about it sounding quite upbeat and friendly, and yeah, I can definitely see that. And of course, yes, that does definitely help with the job that you have. I can imagine that that is a very useful aspect of that. Um, so you are probably most well known for winning Britain's Got Talent in 2018. So could you tell me about what that experience was like for you?
Obviously, I'm a lot richer for a start, but please don't tell the Department of Work and Pensions. Seriously though, winning the show has changed my life in so many ways. I'm busier than I ever was before as a comedian. I've been on 2 nationwide tours, and I have also written a book called I'm Only in It for the Parking. The general public has been so supportive as well. I'm always getting stopped for selfies and having people congratulate me, and it has been excellent. I'm very grateful for all the kind words I have received. One of the best things to happen since I won is that people engage with me more than they would have in the past. For the first time, they seem comfortable talking to a disabled person. I'm used to being stared at for negative reasons, so it's nice to be stared at for positive reasons for a change.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, that must be a really brilliant feeling. And yeah, I mean, it must have been such an incredible accomplishment for you. And like you say, you're busier than you ever were before, and it's all worked out so well for you. Now, obviously, in that moment when you found out that you won, I can imagine there must have been so many emotions going through your head. But could you try and describe what you were feeling in that moment when you discovered that you'd won?
I just felt like I was on the top of the world, and I think my reaction when I won tells you everything you need to know. I was jumping around like a madman. It was nice to have my family there to celebrate with me as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, it must have been brilliant to have, them there to share that moment with you and be in that moment with you. But I don't blame you at all for your reaction. I think most people would have had the same reaction as you there. Now you have already mentioned that you wrote a book called I'm Only in It for the Parking. So let's talk a little bit about that. So can you tell me about the book and the reason behind writing it?
It's always been a dream of mine to write a book, so I'm delighted to have had the opportunity to do so. It's called I'm Only in It for the Parking. And it's basically all about the stupid questions people ask me because I'm disabled. I always get asked a lot of really silly questions in my day-to-day life, so I decided to write them all down for you. My favorites in the book are, have you ever tried to talk just to see what would happen? And are you as clever as Stephen Hawking? Spoiler alert, I'm not. I hope it helps other disabled people from being asked similar stupid questions in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure it will. I mean, it kind of circles back to what we were talking about earlier, doesn't it? About just people thinking they can ask you things because you have a disability. And yes, some of them being quite sort of, stupid questions. I know I've definitely had my fair share as well. And I can imagine that you've been asked quite a few as well. But obviously, like you say, it was your dream to write a book. So how did the opportunity come about for you to do that?
It came after I won Britain's Got Talent, and I was lucky enough to find someone who was interested in me publishing a book. It was a really great experience, but it also took quite a while because I was very busy just after I won.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, I mean, books take a while to write anyway, but with you being so busy as well, it must have taken ages, but it definitely all that perseverance and all the time it took definitely paid off in the end. So what would you say has been your proudest moment so far?
Winning the BBC New Comedy Award was probably my proudest moment because it was the first time I felt that I could make a living out of being a comedian. I just entered the competition because I thought it was a good opportunity to help me develop as a comedian. I'm not really a big fan of stand up comedy competitions, but when you look at the people who have won it in the past, I thought it was worth entering. I especially liked the fact that the comedians were judged by other people in the industry, as well as the general public in the final. I think it gives it a nice balance. I definitely never expected to win the whole thing. I just thought I would give it a go and see how far I got. I couldn't really believe it when I won. It was a very special moment.
Wow, I mean, yeah, I mean, I can't imagine how amazing that must have felt to win that award. Um, yeah, especially if you kind of entered the competition to see if it could help develop your comedy career and then you won it. I mean, that must have been I mean, I can't imagine what you must have felt in that moment, but that must have been absolutely amazing. So, looking forward then, do you have any goals or aspirations for the future that you'd like to achieve?
I've never really set myself targets or had specific ambitions. I just started to do stand up comedy as a laugh, and now I'm making a living out of it. When you sit back and think about it, that's pretty amazing in itself. So I'm just enjoying the ride and seeing where it takes me next. My only goal is to keep making people laugh. As long as I can do that, then I'll be happy.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're doing a very good job at that, and I'm sure you will continue to long into the future. But I think, yeah, I really like the way you've looked at that actually. As it just not, putting too much pressure on yourself, continuing to do what you do and just sort of see what comes out of it. I really like that. Um, yeah, I think it's a really good way to look at things. And yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is amazing that you've made such an incredible career out of it. But I mean, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I mean, um, You're just incredible. Like, you're such a lovely person. You've done amazing things with your book and your incredible stand-up comedy career, and you're just such a wonderful person. And I really admire you. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's been such a pleasure to get to talk to you. It really does mean the world.
It's my pleasure. It's been great to chat to you.
Well, thank you. It's been great to chat to you too. And thank you to my audience for listening. And I will see you all next time.